Welcome. This is a Free Thinker Institute's discussion on the subject of eagerness to give and receive love, one of the 5 intentions of the organization. Feel free to join the discussion on the FTI Discord channel.
Have enough people to get started. I think four's enough for a party. So why don't we kick it off? We'll do. Does everybody know each other? I forget.
I met Daniel once, I think, but I don't know Greg.
I've met Daniel before too, but I don't know Amanda.
Okay, so let's do
Okay.
quick introductions. Yeah, let's just do quick introductions. I'm happy to go first. I mean, you all know me, but just because we're doing this as a recording. So I'm Garrett, computer scientist, entrepreneur, and philosophy hobbyist. Just like to welcome everyone tonight. And Greg, why don't we go in from on my screen, left to right?
Sure. I'm Greg Lopez, and I am into Stoicism. I co-wrote a book with Massimo Pigliucci on the topic and run New York City Stoics, as well as co-founded a nonprofit related to Stoicism, and am on the advisory team for modern Stoicism as well.
Cool. Amanda, your turn.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a therapist. I work in outpatient mental health. I've worked in healthcare for 15 years, and I'm a swimmer and a drummer, and I speak Spanish, and I love to travel. So next stop, Pittsburgh next week. So
Cool.
first time on a plane in, I don't know, 2 years or something.
Understandable.
Yeah,
Hasn't been a good time to fly recently.
no.
Daniel, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, glad to. I'm Daniel, and I teach, I write, and I've begun doing some webinars, which has been a pleasure. And that's me.
All right. So tonight's topic is about giving and receiving love. And I guess I normally do a little bit of an intro, but I'm not going to do much of one tonight. I'm just going to leave it more to open conversation. I will just do a very pithy intro, which is we all want to be loved. So why don't we focus more on giving more love into the world, knowing that the more we give out, that the more likely we are to get it. And so I'll start off with that as a sort of, that's my perspective of giving and receiving love. And I will admit there's a little bit of a dichotomy in that, or sort of a little bit of a contradiction in that giving love doesn't necessarily always directly respond in receiving more love, but I would argue that we're far more likely to get it if we give it out first. And I think that, at least in my life, that has proved to be pretty consistent. And so, to me, like, thinking that way, we should be giving more love to other people, particularly those that are likely to reciprocate. So maybe I'll leave it open to conversation after something short.
So the
Yeah,
reason
go ahead.
I was just going to ask Garrett a question. So the reason that you're kind of putting forth for that is that we give to people who are more likely to reciprocate is because we all want to be loved, and so that's kind of the loop that you're trying to close there.
Yeah. So I guess there's actually a lot of depth into why I'm saying that. That is one reason, but the other is that if you continuously give to someone who doesn't give back to you at all, I consider that to be very like a lot of the people that I've met that are no longer altruistic are no longer altruistic because they gave so much to people that didn't give back to them, and they felt like in order to be an altruist, they had to give to people who didn't give back to them, and they did that to the point where they became bitter. And so, to me, I think that we should at least get appreciation, and giving love doesn't cost us anything. It just is an emotional investment. And if someone can't at least give appreciation, which is, love is a very vague term that so many people have written about, and maybe we should start off by talking about a little bit of a definition of what we mean by love, because it is a very nuanced term. But when I say love, I mean it in the general sense of, and I shouldn't try to quickly define it. We should spend some time to define it correctly. But I just mean, appreciation for who someone is as the essence of themselves. And, for me, if someone can't at least appreciate the essence of my intent to help them, and they're going to be antagonistic towards me when my intent is to help them, why would I keep giving to that person? And I actually do keep giving to them for a while. And then if I realize that this isn't going to change anytime soon, then I have to realize that they're stuck in a pattern that I'm probably not equipped to get them out of. And, depending on my relationship to the person, but if it's not someone I know well, which usually in these cases it isn't, then I say, well, if this person doesn't want to at least appreciate my intent to help them, and they're going to be antagonistic, then, I separate from them, because I have limited time, and there are other people that will be more mutually beneficial relationships that are appreciative of the effort of trying to be, a good friend or what have you, colleague. And so, I think given that this world has over 7 billion people, there are always other people that we can get to know. And I prefer to invest in the ones that are at least somewhat appreciative, because there are enough people that some are and some are absolutely not. And if you are consistently friendly to someone and they're consistently antagonistic, there's a point at which I think it makes sense to cut off. Sorry, I went long.
Yeah, and I think that also what you're saying is like probably related to one of your earlier talks about doing no harm. I think if you do, I think there's also a possibility that if you're in someone's space and they don't really want you there, then it could be potentially harmful.
Totally.
So just psychologically, and so I think that you want to be mindful of like boundaries and where you're not just where you're wanted or needed, but how your presence affects other people. So that just came to mind for me.
I think that's a great point and really relevant to me, because my intent is always to help people, but I think I could be causing people harm without realizing it. Even I was part of a group that said, you should never offer to help someone because that makes you like senior to them and them subservient to you. And I don't agree with that statement, but they said you should try to be of service to someone. And it was, to me, more of a semantic argument than a spirit of the argument. But I do think that some people, just in me trying to be helpful to them, my way of doing it may not be the right way for them. And so I may be causing them more harm and insecurity than I'm actually being helpful to them. So, in those cases, like, it's better for me to back off and like, let them be them, let them handle their own situation and find someone who's more equipped to help them.
I think you bring up a good point. You're making me think about the whole volunteerism industry and how, what Westerners will go to like developing countries and pay to volunteer to get an experience of some kind. And there might be a lot of reciprocity involved in those experiences, but there's all of this debate right now. There's actually a book that I'm gonna read soon. I just ordered it. Kind of questioning the whole industry, because there's this question of whether maybe these people really want to be helped in these volunteer kind of I don't know how fabricated these volunteer opportunities are. I think some of them are legitimately helpful to the people that are there receiving service of different kinds, whether it's like teaching English or community development. But I think there are questions about, like, do these developing countries want to be like developed by Westerners, you already see kind of how developing countries are developed, like for tourism in general, but then there's this volunteer tourism. You know, I was just looking at it online because I had some time between my next job and I'm starting probably in a few weeks, and I was like, well, wouldn't it be great to go volunteer somewhere, you know, and I'm probably not going to do it, but I was looking into it and it was like, you know, pay $2,000 a week to volunteer in a community in Peru, or, you know, and you always wonder what the locals' experience of that is, you know. So there are well-intentioned people like trying to help, but and this goes into the, you know, like there's all this thing about giving aid and giving, you know, but anyway, it just makes me think about, I might be going off a little bit on a tangent, but you know, food for thought about this kind of global phenomenon of like volunteering, and where's the help really needed, and you want to go to a place that like where the people really want the help and you're going to be well received, because you don't want to like breed kind of resentment or like ill will. So
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, and maybe I'm going to try to take a stab at defining love, if I could be so bold, which is a ridiculous, a fool's attempt to try to define love. I feel like I'm fighting a windmill here, but I think for me, it's about an appreciation of the core of who another human being is. And it's like, if you get to know someone at their core, what I call sort of the essence of the spirit, you know, or, you know, I have a blueprint of the spirit is like a document that I put together, which tries to define someone at their core. And if you get to know someone at their core and you have an appreciation for them, to me, that's what love is, like an appreciation for someone at their core. And I'll throw that out there as a possible definition that we can shoot holes in and patch up. But I'm curious what other people think of as what is love.
I think what you're talking about, Garrett, is so important, about before you do something for other people, to appreciate who they are. But I think it's also so difficult because I think it depends upon having a high level of self-acceptance, because if you can't accept yourself, it's going to be hard for you to accept other people with their failings. And so there's just so much growth involved in what you're talking about.
I agree with you. And I think, you know, what I'm saying is sort of like an acceptance of one's own core attributes is the first step to an acceptance of others' core attributes. And so I agree. I think you have to love yourself in order to love others. I would just say, for me, what that means is accepting the core of who you are as being okay, and maybe even defining yourself as something that you think is okay. And only then can you start to show true, honest appreciation for other people and who they really are.
But I have a confession to make along those lines, just very briefly. There are things about me I don't like. There are things about me I wish I could just snap my finger and change them.
Right.
And I it's humbling. I can't.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with that for myself as well. But I still appreciate that I have good intentions, even if I fail in many aspects. And I can think of many people that I've tried to help and I've probably caused harm to. And yet I did know that my intentions were good, and I can feel solid that I had good intentions. And in having those good intentions, I can feel comfortable that I did try hard to do the right thing. And one of my hobbyist philosophy papers is on self-worth. And the quick 30,000 foot summary is that if you try your best to do the right thing, you should feel confident that you're a good person, and you should feel happy with yourself wherever you land. And I think if you, and the Stoic version would be having the courage to do the just thing, if I'm right, and Greg can correct me if I'm wrong, but I learned that from Greg, so I hope that he agrees with me. I hope that I learned it well, but if I failed, Greg, feel free to correct me. So.
I think that's roughly a good fit. I would go a little further in saying that, like in some of the Stoic trainings, like put forth by the Stoic teacher Epictetus, you start with trying to kind of get a control of your strong emotions as a baseline, and that's where people see Stoicism kind of starting and ending. A lot of people come to Stoicism in order to just feel better, but that's just the beginning, and it's the beginning of trying to be a good person. Once you have those under control, then you can try to go and to help others. There's not so much a concept of self-love there. There is in a sense in that some of the ancient Stoics believe that we had a divine spark within us, and so we're bodies that are in a sense encasing part of God, was the ancient Stoic view. So in that sense, kind of trying to act ethically is respecting that version, but also for people who hold this part of metaphysics, that other people who you're going to also have that similar shard of God in them. And so trying to kind of commune with them is like communing with God, and bringing your souls a little closer in alignment with the way the universe unfolds is the kind of broad view of how the ancients and some modern Stoics would see it.
About regarding yourself as a good person, that's a tricky thing. In fact, what I do, I take a very different tact. I even boast to my students that I'm a recovering narcissist or a recovering lover of the darkness, that I got a long way to go. And it frees me up. It frees me up, and I sense it frees my students up also, that if I can be a jerk and I can accept myself being a jerk, well, maybe they can start accepting themselves, even though they are a jerk in certain areas.
So I'm sorry to disagree with you, Daniel, but I don't think you're a jerk. I think you're a nice guy. So I apologize for disagreeing. Please forgive me, but I think you're a nice guy, and I think you do try to be a nice guy, and I think that God found you in His way, and in doing so, He transformed you to the Daniel that I never knew, from the Daniel that I never knew to the Daniel that I know, who is a nice guy. And I think you should be proud of who you are now, but not full of pride, which is a difference. That, egotism is being, to me, full of pride rather than being proud of yourself. And I think it's okay to be proud of yourself if you're trying hard to do the right thing, even if you're failing, because you at least know that you're trying hard to do the right thing, and you're being honest with yourself and with others. And I do think honesty is a big part of that. I want to comment though on Greg's concept of a shard of God, because my philosophical meanderings have come to make me believe that not only do human beings have free will, but that free will comes from God. And if that's true, that's actually very aligned with the ancient Stoic concept that we have a shard of God, meaning that we have a shard of free will given to us from God. So I find that fascinating. And it's not the first time that I've agreed with the ancient Greeks. I have to read more ancient Greek philosophy. That's what it comes down to. I've read some and I always love it. And I really feel like philosophy went downhill after the fall of the Roman Empire. But maybe that's just me being a cynic. But I just feel like the Greek and Roman stuff was so much richer than a lot of the modern stuff.
So we haven't really gotten around to what this love thing is yet.
Yeah, I'm curious. I threw out a definition. I'm curious if it resonated with anyone else. Thank you, Greg, for bringing us back to that. I'm supposed to do that, but I appreciate you doing it instead. We're very egalitarian here, so that's good. I'm curious, did what I say resonate with anyone? Does anyone find fault with it, or does anyone want to put forth their own opinion on what love is?
I think that language is a shifty thing, and each person has their own vision of it, and so it's a little fuzzy, and we can never quite nail something down. One can stipulate a definition and try to say, when I say love in this case, I am talking about these specific things that have this specific quality, but then it may not fit with how other people use the term. So even though the Stoics came from Socrates, where Socrates tried to nail down these necessary and sufficient conditions of exactly what words mean, I disagree with that. I think modern philosophy kind of has that, some modern philosophy of language has that more right, that language is a little shifty. So I would prefer to kind of, it depends on how you're using it, when you're using it, and to what end you're using it. I wouldn't say that there is a definition of love per se.
Is that the Roman form in the background, Greg?
That is the actual ancient Stoa. What's left of it, it is the Stoa Poikile. What remains of it in Athens.
Okay. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have digressed, but it looked familiar, so I think I was there. One of multiple vacations. So, but I agree with you, Greg. But I guess my understanding from like starting from the 20th century is a lot of everything after Wittgenstein was all about just spending a lot of time and effort defining stuff. I don't want to simplify it too much, but I agree with you. I think it's better to stipulate a definition and then come to agreement on it. So maybe we should do that tonight, is stipulate a definition of love that we can agree on and just come from our own perspective, not necessarily trying to even come from a universal perspective. Just, this is what I think it is. And I gave what I think it is to me, but I reserve the right to change my mind based on what everyone else says. And so I'm curious whether or not that perspective resonated with any of you individually, or whether or not you can find a fault with it and try to improve it, or whether or not you want to put forth your own definition.
I'm sorry, you go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. I think appreciation is a very significant part of love, but I think that we could go deeper with it to, like affection. And I also think about selflessness as part of like exuding love, there's a part of it that kind of implies a degree of selflessness, because I think that if you are loving someone, because we could also be talking about loving something, but if we're talking about love between humans, I think there's a degree of selflessness that goes along with appreciation and affection. So these are just like, I think, qualifiers, or components of love, to think about, because I think it's a very multi-layered word. I don't think that we can really come up with one definition, but I think that we can think about aspects of love or components of love, and I just think that it's a complex word, and it has a complex meaning, and it means different things for different people. So I think there's like ways of thinking about it, like there's romantic love, and there's friendship love, and there's the love that you have for your home, and there's also the other word that comes to mind is attachment. So I'm throwing out these words because I think they're really highly related to how we think about love in general, but that it can kind of be deconstructed into different layers. Kind of like there are different connotations, or like there was different meaning attached to it depending on context. I think I think context is the other thing that I'm thinking of that we need to consider.
So set a context and choose your own definition. Don't worry about anyone else's. Again, there's only 4 of us here, and we're defining love according to what we agree on, and we're not worried with what everyone else agrees on. They can come to the next session and they can help give their definition to that session. But I think your point about romantic versus platonic versus, love of a place or thing versus, I would add, children, being a father, are all different kinds of love. But to me, the definition that I gave is the essence of all of those types of love, which is the essence of the core of who someone is. And I would agree with you that, and point taken, that it's deeper than just appreciation for, it's more an affection towards another person. For me, love doesn't have to be selfless completely. It needs to be putting the other person before oneself, and maybe that's what you mean by selfless. But I think, like, if you love something or someone, you put it or them before your own person. And I guess I would include that as part of the definition, my definition of love, trying to refine my definition based on your feedback and move it forward.
It's a very biblical definition, putting other people's welfare and needs above your own. And of course, I don't like it when people are talking about selflessness, because I think women have it way over us when it comes to that, to be a bit sexist here. Yeah, I think us men struggle with that. I think we're just so focused, this narrow focus on where we want to go and what we want to do. And I think it's hard. I think it's really hard for us. It's very humbling. But I do like your definition, Garrett, also. Not to say I found anything wrong with yours, Amanda, but Garrett, the fact of appreciating the other person. But I just think it's very, very difficult. I appreciate also the fact that your definition is not so thoroughly performance-based, even though performance, doing things out of love is an important part of it.
That's part of the thing. I think, I know people who are not really successful in life, but are some of the kindest, like, most well-intentioned people that try very hard to be kind and well-intentioned people. And I'm very confident that with time, they'll be very successful. And depending on my success, I will help them be more successful. But, like, for now, I still, love them platonically, because the essence of who they are is a very well-intentioned, compassionate person that wants to make the world a better place. And what's not to love about that? I don't know. Like, they don't have to be a billionaire. Like, there are billionaires that I think are complete jerks, and I don't love them. I feel compassion for them because they're probably miserable, complete jerks. But, so I feel compassion for them, even though they're billionaires and far wealthier probably than I'll ever be. But, yeah, I'm curious if, and I had the liberty of adapting my definition from Amanda's feedback. So admittedly, it's not all my definition. It's my definition after being adapted to Amanda's feedback. So, Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I'm not. It depends on what you mean at the end of the day. And I think, like, love can be wavering to some degree. I agree with Daniel's point about it, like, not focusing on the performative aspect, because I do tend to want to emphasize internal states, because I think genuine actions come from internal states, like actually trying to care about people. But at the same time, it's hard to do that. It's, if you're grumpy, or a big thing for me is if I'm sleep deprived, I notice that I am much more prone to be snappy at other people. And so if I snap at somebody who I love, I'm going to try to ameliorate that by maybe getting more sleep or removing myself, rather than working with it in the moment, or beating myself up for saying that wasn't a loving thing to do, because I think it's more of a tendency over time. So I think part of the thing about, like, giving love, it is a hard thing, because so many external factors could come into play. And I think the main thing is kind of keeping it as an ideal, because it's a target to aim for, but even an expert marks person can't necessarily always hit the target.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think um, Daniel's the Christian teacher here, not me, but I'm gonna give a paraphrase back from Christ saying, "Someone slaps you, turn the other cheek," and Daniel can probably get the actual verbatim words down. But I really, like, the older I get, the more I realize the wisdom of that phrase, which is, if someone kind of beats you up, respond with compassion and love, and maybe because we've kind of talked about the definition of love, I want to talk about the action of love a little bit. And that is that I think treat like the only real solution is, in some respects, love. Like, there's no solution in hitting someone back harder than they hit you. You may knock them out, but then they may come back with a gun the next day and then end your life. And so really an increasing level of violence, whether it's verbal violence or physical violence or both, is not a solution to the problem. The only solution to the problem, in my opinion, is what I would call love, which is an appreciation for who someone is and what they're going through. And maybe my definition was a little bit, it was toward getting to the core of who someone is, but also the state of what they're going through, which Greg's perspective brought to light, which is maybe I'm sleep deprived, and if Greg's having a bad day and snaps at me, I could respond in two ways. I could be like, Greg, what's your problem? Why are you being a jerk? Or I could say, Greg, what's wrong? Is there anything I can do to help you? And one of those ways will actually solve the problem, and one of those ways will make Greg more likely to be more upset at me rather than more friendly toward me, and is a relationship ender. And so I would argue that what I call verbal arms races, which is verbal boxing matches, which is like someone hits you, you hit them back harder, which is what I see happen all the time on social media, by the way. It's just constant. And to me, that doesn't solve the problem. All it does is end up with a victor and a loser, and no real net happiness. Neither one of them are happy. And so the only way to actually end more have both people end more happy is responding with love, meaning an appreciation of who the other person is and what they're going through, and really feeling compassion for that person, whether they're having a positive or negative moment, feeling compassion for them and feeling affection for them either way. And there's a point at which, like I said, I give up on someone, even if like I want to feel compassion for them. If they're repeatedly caustic, then I'm going to feel like I'm simply ineffective at helping them, and so I'm going to separate myself from them.
I'm a little confused on one point, going back to the definition of whether, in your view, it's possible to love somebody who you don't know very well, since by your definition, the loving somebody is loving somebody for who they are, and it's very hard to get that knowledge. With enough time, you could get close enough. But for somebody who you don't know very well, who, like, you come on an internet forum, or the billionaires you mentioned earlier, you may know some personally, but you may be having some in mind that you don't know personally, and yet you said you didn't love them, but that would kind of be obvious if you didn't necessarily know who they were at their core, at least have some idea of that. So I'm curious for you, Garrett, as well as others, if you think that this idea of love can be really extended to people you don't know too well. It feels inappropriate to me, like to say that I could go and love somebody who I barely know. So I think that that points to some agreement with the definition of loving people for who they are at their core. But at the same time, I would then say approaching people who you don't know very well, even acquaintances, never mind in a large city, the people you pass on the street and have some passing interaction with. I'm not sure if love necessarily applies there.
So great, really interesting point, Greg. And I guess I would respond with that saying, I think that all human beings have sentience and free will, and in having free will, they have an ability to reason, and in having an ability to reason, they all have a core essence of some sense of judgment. And I would argue that in our lives, based on what happens to us and based on our willpower and our desire to improve ourselves, quote unquote, or to do the right thing, which might be at odds sometimes, kind of going about this in a long-winded way, sorry. But basically, essentially, people can suffer from delusions or misunderstandings is the more polite term that I like to use. But Buddhists call it delusions. At least a friend of mine that's a former Buddhist monk that taught me that delusions are one of the three evils of Buddhism. Use that word. I like to say misunderstandings, but I think people who have a core self that is something that I would not find desirable is a core self that grew up from delusions or misunderstandings, rather than they are in their core essence an evil person or a horrible person. I think it's a very, very small number of people, if any, that are truly maliciously evil. I think they're just people that are suffering from a lot of misunderstanding. And so I would posit, and you guys can tell me I'm full of it, but I would posit that I actually do feel love for people that I don't know well, simply as being a part of the human condition and as being fellow sentient beings that can reason. And I think I feel affection for the core of who they are and what they struggle with. And honestly, the uglier they are, the more compassion I feel for them. But perhaps the less capable I am of helping them, although I would always try if I came into contact with them. But I would say, even with my definition, there's a certain amount that you can know about every human being as having sentience and having free will and the ability to reason as, and I have another paper that argues that objective morality, which is maximizing happiness and minimizing harm, is achievable through pure reason. And so this may explain why I come to this conclusion, is that I think that every human being has the ability to reach that if they really tap into themselves and are honest with themselves. And just some of us are suffering from so much misunderstanding that we never get there, or, we're having trouble getting there.
I just wanted to say, you guys, you talk about the compassion you have and the love you have for people that you barely know. And I really admire that. Because that's hard for me, because I come from such a crazy background that when I meet people initially, my first reaction is, I don't like you at all. That's my first. It's a defensive reaction. I've experienced so much rejection in my life. I got this rejection lens. And even though I know better, that lens still plays a role. And it's tough. And so that's great that you have that. And keep it, even though it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt when people don't reciprocate.
Well, that's why ultimately I do need, I'm sorry, Amanda, go ahead. I talked a lot.
No, I think that, for someone like me who's in a helping profession or healthcare role, where we across the board are giving a service or to people we don't know all the time. And there is a degree of you have to kind of infuse your actions and your intentions with love to do this kind of work on a daily basis. And there's always this risk of kind of burning out. If you are kind of inundated with need and you don't have enough time or enough, and the time is kind of an element with the kind of service that you're giving, that all of these factors need to be balance. There needs to be this balance to kind of give compassion to people who are suffering over the course of a career, years, decades of this kind of work, where you're in a role where you're helping people as selflessly as possible, because your role or in the healthcare setting is your needs don't exist in that interaction. You're really there for the person's needs. So I think that whole dynamic is really relevant to this conversation to consider, because there are people who day in, day out are really giving of themselves and giving some kind of a service to other people as they're core mission in life. And there is a degree of love that you have to have for the stranger, you know, or the person in need, to be able to either listen to them or offer them advice or offer them a resource or be their nurse or their physician or, you know, whatever it is. But I don't think everyone is equipped to do that kind of work, but I think it does require, like, if you were a professional in one of these settings and you were not receiving love on a regular basis from anyone, it's really hard to do this kind of work, because you have to kind of have your cup filled, you know, to kind of like give. So you have to kind of be receiving compassion and love and from somewhere to kind of be able to, I mean, this is my speculation and what I've observed and experienced, to be able to give compassionate regard and kindness to other people in the course of, you know, day-to-day life. So as much as human beings have the capacity to love, if they're not loved in their lives or have had a very troubled past, as Garrett was kind of referring to, it becomes more difficult to give love unconditionally, or, you know, these are just kind of like some basic principles that I feel like I've learned. Whether they're true or not is another story, but that's my feedback right now.
So I have a thought experiment for you, Amanda. You said your needs don't really exist in the interaction because you're there to help other people. I get where you're coming from, but let me give you a thought experiment that challenges that. Suppose that you accidentally lie to a patient and they feel better. And then if you keep lying to them, they feel better and better. At least they say they do, right? And that's how it is by your perception. Should you take the more honest path and be honest with them, even though they get aggressive or rude, if you're honest with them? And at that point, if I was in that situation and I was in your profession, I would be honest with them, because at the end of the day, A, I think that will help them more in the long run, and B, I would be upset at myself and feel like I didn't do my best if I weren't honest with them, even though the symptoms seem to be better by lying to them. And so theoretically, what may look like it's helping them on the surface may not be what really helps them in the long run. And you may have to go through some rougher waters, but in some respects, being honest with yourself and treating yourself with respect and knowing that you want to be honest with yourself may be more important than just making them act like they feel good or say that they feel good. And maybe they actually do feel good if they're a narcissist and you're just telling them how amazing they are. Maybe they feel great at that, but that's not going to help them in the long run, right?
Yeah, no, I don't know if that's what I was referring to, but I think that the professional person who's giving does have needs that are fulfilled by these interactions. I guess that's what I'm trying to, like, you're supposed to kind of leave yourself at the door and just kind of be in service to the other person. But at the end of the day, the person who's giving does receive something from the interaction, whether it's gratification or a sense of purpose or meaning, ascribed to their kind of life mission or whatever they're trying to fulfill. So I think just like people in other roles are giving other types of services. So I mean, healthcare is just one example. It's the example that I know, but like I said, I think it's difficult to be in service to others if you're not receiving love from some source, because I think there's all this like reciprocity that has to, it's a system, you know, like systems have to be, they can't be like deficient in one area and still run smoothly, so.
I'll throw in something since nobody else is. I think in the immediate, what you're saying, Amanda, is very true. But I also see that people who have been very broken and have had great needs have been more receptive to change than people who have grown up in very stable backgrounds, and they might have in some other ways more to offer. Now, maybe that selflessness that you're talking about, maybe that is something they can't aspire to, because they're still wrestling with many psychological needs. But through these needs, through this brokenness, they develop other senses, other abilities, other things they can pass on to people.
Sure, I'm not. I think that's a great point, and I think that holds a lot of water. I think that people of all abilities have something to offer, in all walks of life. So, regardless of their upbringing or their background, or what brings them to their place in life.
Mhm. In fact, there's a verse in the Bible that's been a real comfort to me, because sometimes you can look at yourself and you get really discouraged, and that had been my experience. But there are a lot of like wisdom. One wisdom is when I'm weak, it's then I'm strong, because it's then that I come to borrowing from Greg's terminology, that inner that spark, that shard, that inner divine element, to lift me up, and to know I'm being taken care of, to know that I don't have to look at myself and I don't have to weigh whether I got what it takes, because as I was saying before, I know I don't have what it takes, but I have a God who does have what it takes, and I can just cast my cares upon him. And so I don't have to defend myself. I don't have to prove myself. And of course, I have those human instincts. I want to, but I have another resource or another frame of reference, and that's God himself.
There's also I think what you're bringing up is an important point, because I'm definitely in your camp, Daniel, more than in Garrett's camp per se, in that I am naturally a grumpy person who has to kind of actively work at this kind of stuff. And so I'll team Daniel. But also I think when I'm weak, therefore then I'm strong is an interesting perspective, because a lot of the initial emotions and reactions that come up in my head are not necessarily in my control. They're part of past habits and patterns, and maybe choices I made, maybe external influences, but they're not, I don't take them as like necessarily core to myself. And when I practice well, they are grist for the mill to try to work with them and say, oh, why do I feel this way? And how can I work with this in a possibly more healthy way? And I even try to open the question a little further and sometimes say, like, not necessarily say, oh, this seemingly nasty reaction necessarily may have some water. Where is it coming from? When I have the time to do that, and when I'm aware, that's how I kind of work with it. So personal places of weakness can be useful to grow. And I find that trying to have the attitude, and most importantly, remembering to do it, which I think is the hardest part for me. It seems like when I fall out of practice, it's because I'm forgetting. Something else has taken my attention, or I'm just not completely up to speed or have had recent practice in trying to shift that awareness. But I think coming from the place of weakness is useful, because that's what allows you to work with it. You can't get strong in the gym if you're not weak to start, right?
Yeah, I actually would argue there's a natural corrective formula that God or higher powers have kind of put into place, which is the less we focus on self-improvement, the less happy we are, and thus the more willing to change we are, and the more open to adapting our behaviors. And by the way, if I said if I said this comes natural to me, I didn't mean to, or that I'm not naturally grumpy, I didn't mean to. Ask my wife. She'll tell you a very different story. So I do think it's hard, but I also think that the more that it's interesting. I think that it does depend on the person, but I think that most people, the more that they suffer, or I think a lot of people, the more that we suffer, the more compassionate and focused on self-improvement we become. And then some people, when they suffer, become more bitter and more angry. And I think it's interesting to see that different people respond differently to the same stimuli. And that's sort of a testament to the fact that each of us is unique. But I would argue that the right way to think about it is, if we're suffering, we need to think about what are we doing that's causing us to suffer, and how can we change what's in our control so that we can be happier. And I will say that I have become much happier. And I'm pretty sure, Greg, it was from your meetup that I first learned about Stoic practical wisdom. And it totally changed my life in many respects. I can give one very tangible example: is traffic jams. I used to get so frustrated with traffic jams. And now I just go up, it's out of my control, I'm not going to worry about it. And like, I just go on at like 5 miles an hour for an hour and I'm good to go. And I've conditioned myself to not be upset about it. And part of it was, I was driving 2 hours on a regular basis to visit a family member with terminal cancer. And I was in traffic jams, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about it. It's just not, like, that's out of my control. This is out of my control. And I'm going to visit my family member, and I'm not going to worry about it. And I naturally conditioned myself not to worry about it. And it was a conscious effort of separating what's in my control from what's out of my control, and saying, I'm not going to let the stuff that's out of my control worry me. But the stuff that's in my control, I do need to be focused on. And self-improvement is very much in my control, which is the first part of the Freethinker Institute 5 intentions, is self-improvement. And we should all be focused on self-improvement, in my opinion, all the time, because being our best self will make us happier and more honest, and those around us happier and more honest. And those are good things to go after. So, and I think Stoic practical wisdom is a great way of going about it, which is, don't stress yourself out about the stuff that you can't do anything about. I mean, I met someone who was suffering from extreme anxiety that he was going to get cancer. He was in his 20s and he was suffering from extreme anxiety, like literally crippling fear that he was going to get cancer. And I just politely spoke with him for a little while about, how likely do you think it is that you're going to get cancer? And we had, half an hour conversation about the practical realities. And, it helped him, and it helped him realize, what, this is super unlikely. I'm not going to worry about it anymore. And I also used Stoic practical wisdom with him, which is, can you control whether or not you get cancer? No, there's nothing I can do about it. Is there any use in worrying about it then? No, yeah, there's really not. And it was a longer conversation than this, but you get the idea. And it did help him. And then he fell back into the same worry a couple of weeks later, when I didn't talk to him for maybe a couple months later, actually, when I didn't talk to him for a while. But it at least helped him for a couple of weeks.
Does this guy need a therapist?
Yes, he does need a therapist.
Okay.
He
Maybe
can't
you could recommend that.
he can't afford a therapist. So that's why I was helping him, quite frankly, because usually the people that I'm helping are people that can't afford a therapist. They're people I meet on social media that have, any number of a variety of challenges in life. And
There are
usually,
cost options.
usually one of them is socioeconomic. So, and in some states, which I learned through social media contacts, Medicaid is not supported for a lot of people that it is supported in the state that we live in, or the states that we live in. But a lot of, and I don't want to get into politics, but a lot of states have not allowed Medicaid for socioeconomically disadvantaged members of society. And so, I know people that can't get any kind of healthcare whatsoever, even though they're impoverished and can barely get enough food to eat, but they don't get health care because there's no Medicaid.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, it would be political for me to say I don't think that's right, but I'm going to still say I don't think that's right. I'm sorry to get a little political, but I'm going to get that political.
Just wondering, Garrett, do you go to like on social media? Do you go to mental health groups? Is that how you meet?
No, I go to philosophy groups. But I naturally, although that's not true, I did go to a group that was like, a depression group just to help people, to be of assistance. So, someone said that they were talking with someone in a mental health group. And so I did join I forget what it was called. It was like something for people with mental health issues. And I did go to it because someone said there was a person there who needed help. And I said, I'm happy to try to help. So I did. But usually I'm there to chat philosophy, which is my hobby. And I have very little time for anything outside of my family and my business other than practical philosophy. But helping people is practical philosophy in my perspective. And so, when I meet people who are going through depression or anxiety or stuff like that, but it's interesting. And maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just the people that I interact with, but I find a lot of people on social media do have mental health issues when you get to know them really well. And I don't know if it's that there's a very large percentage of the population that has mental health issues, or that it's a very large percentage of social media people that have mental health issues. But there are a large percentage of people that I meet that have mental health issues on social media. And we're chatting about philosophy 1 minute, and then we start doing direct messaging, and then, hey, this is what's going on with me. Just wanted to see if, what your thoughts are. And it becomes a different conversation. And that's fine with me. Like that's, again, like my goal is to be helpful to people. And that's why practical philosophy is my hobby, is to be helpful to people. And it's actually probably helped me more than anyone else to write the stuff that I've written, because I actually pay careful attention to everything I write. And like, I learn a lot by writing the papers that I write. And so, I hope that they're helpful to other people too, but they've definitely been helpful to me. I also believe in the law of attraction, which is that you get attracted to people who you have a natural reason to become attracted to. And so, I think if I can be helpful to people, then I will naturally attract people that I can be helpful to. And so there's that. And
yeah, I just think across the board, people are suffering emotionally. I think most people are suffering emotionally in some capacity at some point in their lives. And by and large, in American society, I mean, the US is ahead of other countries in mental health access, like accessibility. But even still, we have so much, so far to go, because it's not really accessible. I work on an online platform that tries to expand accessibility to people who might not, it doesn't require insurance, it requires a subscription. So people are paying, but still paying something, it's not free. But a lot of people I talk to are like, I've never gone to counseling, and most people haven't. I mean, most people haven't done that kind of work or exploration of themselves, unfortunately. I think it needs to be widely available, so and utilized, but because I just think everybody could benefit from it.
had a thought and then I lost it. That's why I take notes.
maybe this will kind of lubricate your memory. You know, I have reservations about self-help and about what we can do. I think we can make modest changes, but I think we're very limited in that way. And I part of it's coming from my own experience, you know, of wrestling with myself and trying to change myself. And so I've introduced the idea that oftentimes when we communicate this idea that you have the resources and you can bring about these changes, what we might be doing in some cases is placing an extra burden on people's shoulders, saying you can do it, and they try it and they try it, and then they find out they can't do it. And that's been largely my experience. And the only way I can admit it is that my strength is just having a God who's I know loves me and is taking care of me. Other than that, I couldn't face this reality.
Well, I definitely think that we do have a God that loves us, but I also think that he gave us free will and that he expects us to use that free will to do the best that we can do with the life that we have. And so I would never expect of anyone anything other than to try hard to do the right thing. But I will expect of everyone to try hard to do the right thing. Now, they may be misunderstanding what the right thing is. And I would argue that almost everyone doing things that I completely disagree with thinks they're doing the right thing. And they fully believe that it's the right thing. And they're working really hard at doing the right thing. And I just disagree about what the right thing is. And I think that most conflict comes from a misunderstanding about what the right thing is. And you know, this comes back to the ancient Greeks, and probably Greg can remember the philosopher that said this, but you know, what man doesn't think that he's a good man? You know, what man wakes up in the morning and tries to be an evil man? You know, like no man thinks that. He wakes up and tries to be a good man. But misunderstandings lead us to do different things from each other because we have different understandings of what being a good man is or doing the right thing is. And that's why I say, like, most frustrations, and the older I get, the more I realize this, most disagreements, quite frankly, are about communication and a lack of listening rather than a true fundamental disagreement. And I would say 80% fall into the miscommunication, misunderstanding category, and 20%, this is just 80-20 rule, 20% are actual disagreements in values and goals, you know. And you know, even when it comes to politics, and I would argue especially when it comes to politics, oh, now I remember what I was going to say. So sorry, see, I had to talk for 10 minutes, sorry. What it was about the mental health challenges that the country is facing. I want to share statistics. I don't remember the exact ratio, but it was somewhere between the average American has somewhere between 1 and 2 what they would consider close friends. That is, to me, an epidemic. That is a major problem. If we can only say that we have 1 to 2 people that we consider close friends, that means a very large percentage of people have 0 close friends. And that is depressing, but not depressing like let's get depressed and give up hope. It's depressing as in let's get our shit together, sorry for the language, and try to fix it. And I am trying to do that with the Free Thinker Institute. That's the whole point of the Free Thinker Institute, trying to create this warm, open-minded, accepting community with common values that are values that I think any reasonable person would agree to, like self-improvement, right? Being transparent about who we are and having an open mind to new ideas, and using critical thinking skills to evaluate which ideas are good and bad, and then trust your own judgment over everybody else's judgment.
I agree with you. I agree with your emphasis upon free will, our emphasis upon taking responsibility. Where we might diverge is when it comes to the deeper things, trying to change those deeper patterns within us. It's very, very difficult. At least that's been my experience.
No, I will agree with you that it's very difficult, but I would argue that the most difficult things are the ones most worth going after, and the ones the most worth trying the hardest for. And so all I would say is, let's have faith in other people and ourselves to do those things. Let's follow that Stoic practical wisdom that to me is the secret to happiness, aka the serenity prayer, although Niebuhr came up with it in the 1800s and the Stoics came up with it in the BC years. So I'm going to give the Stoics the benefit of the doubt that they came up with it before Niebuhr. But it was still the same great wisdom, which is separate what's in your control from what's out of your control, focus your happiness on what's in your control. And if we do just that, and we try our hardest to do the right thing and be happy with where we land, and we try to, listen with an open mind and be transparent and use our critical thinking skills and maximize happiness and minimize harm, which are the and then give and receive love openly, which are the whole point of the Freethinker Institute, we can create a warm, open-minded community of people with very different conclusions, but a similar philosophy at coming about their conclusions, that can use communication to better understand other people and why they come to different conclusions than themselves. And it creates a paradigm of the 5 intentions that allows you to better understand other people's perspectives by using that open-mindedness and critical thinking skills. And by using your open mind and your critical thinking skills, you can better put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to that you disagree with. And I feel like that's what's missing in society today. We don't spend enough time listening. And I think it was Epictetus that said we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. Am I wrong, Greg?
Zeno, I believe.
Are you sure? Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to Google it.
I wanted to add that we live in a very violent society, and some people think that the right thing to do is to react with violence. And so we all have the capacity to be, not the capacity, but like, there's always a chance that somebody who you would never think would be violent would become violent. And I think that to the extent possible, we want to reduce as a whole, or like one of my personal missions is like reducing the likelihood that people are going to become violent, either towards themselves or to other people. And so I think that keeping that in mind, like we live in a very violent and a very cold society, because what you're talking about is that this loneliness factor, maybe people without friends are not very lonely, but I would argue that they are. That the whole fabric of our society is broken down in a lot of ways socially, and the way that people see community. And I'm a little bit of a hippie, so I'm like, I'm like preaching free love and community and availability of services to everyone and open borders, and I'm like very much of a tree hugger, but I think that keeping in mind how violent society really is. We have like wars going on around the world right now. I just keep that in mind for myself, because I think that that's like, obviously it's the extreme, but people are also hurting their loved ones too, like in their own homes. So it's not just about gun violence or wars, but like how are people treating each other on a daily basis. And I think that if we're talking about love, we're talking about, the best possible scenario. And so we just have to keep in mind, like, what are some of the worst case scenarios going on right now, and how can we kind of infuse, if we can infuse more love into society, which I think is like what you're talking about, maybe we can counteract some of this, some of these actions that are happening that are really like the most undesirable, for people who say that they love each other or hurting each other on a regular basis, so there is a huge need for people for there to be an improvement, and to Daniel's point, like it might not be possible, but shouldn't we, this is my idealistic self here, shouldn't we try to reduce the likelihood that people are going to hurt each other? And what can we do for that? If I'm a therapist in a clinic and I'm only seeing like 40 patients a week, like I'm only impacting 40 people a week, to me that's like not enough, but to other people I'd be like, oh, like, this is just an impossible task that we shouldn't even try to do. So I think, there's all this variability in between, and what can we do if people who are not necessarily thinking about this can start thinking about it, I think that that's a huge step forward.
I agree with you completely, and I want to say I failed. I did set an alarm for the top of the hour, and I put it on the wrong hour because I was multitasking in the beginning of our chat. So, total epic fail on the time check. So, I'm going to run around. If anyone has sort of last thoughts to share, it's 8:15. So, just want to ask everyone for last thoughts, and I'll share a few maybe last. And why don't we go in the opposite order that we did introductions? So we'll go Daniel first.
Okay. You know, I wanted to say that I agree with all of you that we have to take responsibility, that we have to pursue the, use a Stoic term, the virtuous life. And but here's where we disagree. I think that we're very limited. We're very vulnerable people. And Amanda, you mentioned violence. And when confronted with the hardships of life, one of them is violence. You know, we're just little grains of, dust that can be blown away so easily. And so my answer, what gets me through, is just knowing the love of God. And that's it. And when you know that, no matter how many times you fail, no matter, you keep on getting up. You keep on getting up because you know you're beloved. You know that he's there, and you know what your future is going to be.
Amanda?
Well, you just said something that I have right here on a little trinket. It says, "Success consists of getting up just one more time than you fall," by Oliver Goldsmith. So you just, I just picked this up off my desk. So thanks, Daniel. No, I think this is a hugely important topic. I'm so glad that we had a chance to discuss it today. I think that people are maybe not having such an expansive view of love, that they have a kind of a narrow view of what it is. Maybe it's just what they ascribe to their, partner or family. So, I think that we can expand it into a more societal realm and think about how we can impact people, from a distance, and people we don't know in our everyday lives. So just by infusing more love into society, and I think that we can reap, we'll end up reaping rewards that way, because we think about public policy or environmental policy. For example, I just finished a course in eco-psychology. If we can treat the planet with more love and give back to Mother Nature with more love, then we'll hopefully have better outcomes, down the road, because we do reap a lot of benefits from the natural environment, whether it's health benefits or practical benefits. But if we think about a reciprocal relationship with the earth, it's that we have a responsibility, and hopefully a mission, to protect the environment and love the natural environment as much as we love other people.
Thanks, Amanda. Greg?
So it's a big topic, so we barely scratched the surface. I would probably say that sometimes I still have some doubts about whether people are truly capable of the same kind of love across all beings and other people. And I think that's maybe okay. It could be put to the side. I tend to, when I talk to people, and what I try to do myself, is try to practice seeing the other person's perspective, at least, and caring more about that other person instead of being just vicious and wanting to see the other person suffer, which is kind of what anger is trying to justify. So I think that these topics, it can be sometimes pie in the sky, but for practical purposes, I think what was said previously about getting back up after you fall over is kind of very important, and also to try to care more about things around you, like the environment as well, can be ways to practice it. And one thing that we touched on a bit, but not, I think we didn't put much emphasis on, was the receiving love portion. And sometimes it's hard to receive love because you have practiced, or I mean, I think I've seen it a little bit of myself, where self-criticism and negative modes of thought to the point of like self-criticism in an unuseful way can then be practiced upon others too. And although I think we talked a lot about how maybe different people in adversity may respond and flourish in some circumstances from the adversity by working with it, also it can be hard, and sometimes if a person's hard on themselves, then it's a pattern that could then be put upon others. And so I'm glad that this topic was both giving and receiving love, because I think in some circumstances, not all cases, trouble receiving love can be a part of giving love, because the same repeated practice of beating myself up and then beating other people up and being highly judgmental can be ingrained. And it's a tough job to overcome it. And the goal is to maybe make progress if it sounds like it's useful to make progress in that area, which I believe so.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so as far as all the wars going on in the world, I would argue that the only way to end wars with peace, logically speaking, or love, meaning end wars with love and peace. And I would also say to Daniel, yeah, we are limited, and there is a threat of violence, and that's part of why I think we should stop before we incite someone to violence. If they're starting to escalate and get more and more negative, then it's better to separate ourselves from them rather than continue, even if our intentions are to help them, because usually there are warning signs that someone's going to get more angry with what you're doing than be appreciative of it. And then I would say I agree with Greg that receiving love is important, and negative self-talk can be a big negative and prevent us, end up having us beat ourselves up so much that we don't want to give love to others because we don't even feel that we love ourselves. So I agree with all of that. Whether or not we are capable of love across all beings, I know that I don't love all beings equally. I think I love all beings as being sentient beings, but I definitely love some more than others. And I make more of an effort to help those that I think will maximize more happiness and minimize more harm in the world. And so I put more effort in towards some people than towards others. And I think that that's actually an okay thing to do. And that's another conversation we could have a whole topic of another night, is whether or not it's okay to judge other people. And, I think the Bible says that it's God's place to judge, not people's place to judge. I would probably agree with that, but I would argue it's people's place to discern between where our time is best used and where it's not. And I would discern that those who maximize happiness and minimize harm the most are the ones that I want to help the most. And then lastly, I would say most people are lonely given the statistics in America, and that most people probably could use an extra good friend. And part of the Free Thinker Institute community is to make new friends that agree with the 5 intentions. So if they resonate with you, then I hope people will join the Free Thinker Institute, be a part of the online community, and sit in and have some conversations with us like the ones that we had tonight, because no one warned me about the time. So I assume you guys were having as much fun talking as I was. And I appreciate having friends like all of you. And I hope that we will have more of these conversations in the online community and in the coming months and years and decades. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you.
Everybody else too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.